The guests were already seated when Delia walked up the aisle. Not the bride, not a bridesmaid. She was 63 years old, wearing a belted dress she had ironed 3 times that morning and a pair of low heels that pinched just at the toe. She held a small clutch purse in both hands, the way a person holds something they are not sure belongs to them. She had taken 2 buses to get to the church, transferred at Mercer and Fifth, and stood for the last 6 blocks because the second bus was crowded and there were no seats. She had not been invited. She had not known until 2 weeks ago that she was supposed to be here at all. And yet, when the usher reached the front pew, the one roped off with a white satin ribbon and a small placard that read, "Family Only," he unclipped the ribbon and gestured her inside. She hesitated. He nodded, gentle, certain, and said, "She asked for you specifically." Delia sat down next to a woman who turned and looked at her with polite, puzzled eyes, and Delia looked straight ahead at the altar flowers and tried to keep her hands still. She had no idea why a bride she had met exactly twice had placed her here. If you have ever done a kindness for a stranger and never heard another word about it, stay with this story. It may say something back to you. Delia Marsh had worked the Route 9 bus for 31 years, not as a driver, as a regular, a daily, a woman so consistent in her habits that the drivers knew her by name and the other regulars had absorbed her into the furniture of their mornings. She rode the 712 southbound every weekday from her apartment on Crestfield to the hospital laundry room where she worked the morning shift, and she rode the 440 northbound home, and on Saturdays she sometimes took the 10:15 to the farmer's market if she had a little extra at the end of the week. She knew the rhythms of that bus the way a person knows a neighbourhood, which seats got the morning sun, which stop had the broken shelter that let the rain in sideways, which driver kept the heat too high and which one left it barely running. She had raised 2 sons, mostly alone, in a 3-room apartment on Crestfield. Her husband, Carl, had been gone 11 years. Not dead, just gone. The quiet kind of leaving that happens so slowly you do not notice it is finished until you realise no one has said your name in the house for 6 weeks. Her older boy, Marcus, was 38 now and lived in Atlanta with his wife and 2 daughters. Her younger boy, Kevin, was 35 and worked construction on the west side and came for dinner on the first Sunday of every month. They were good men. She had made them good men out of next to nothing, and she was proud of that, even on the evenings she sat alone with the television on and wondered how the years had gone by so quietly. She was not a bitter woman. That was the thing people who knew Delia said first about her. She had every reason, and she had chosen not to be. She did small things. It was just how she was built. She noticed when the elderly man at the Mercer stop forgot his umbrella on the seat, and she chased him down half a block in the rain to return it. She kept a packet of crackers in her purse for the days she saw someone on the bus who looked like they had not eaten, and she offered them in a way that did not make the person feel seen doing it. She sat beside the young woman who was crying quietly into her phone one November morning, and she did not ask questions. She just said, "You do not have to be all right now," and left it there. And the young woman had looked at her with something close to relief, and then looked away. None of it was for an audience. That was the other thing about Delia. It was a Thursday morning in late February, almost 4 years ago, when she first saw the girl on the bench. The 712 was running 8 minutes late, which happened more in winter, and Delia was waiting at the Crestfield stop with her coat buttoned to the collar and her hands in her pockets. It was 22 degrees. The bench at the stop was half covered in ice, and the small shelter did nothing useful against the wind coming off the avenue. A young woman was sitting on the bench, or rather she was folded onto it, her whole posture curved inward the way people curve when they have been sitting still for a long time and have run out of warmth. She was maybe 24, 25. She was wearing a light jacket that was not built for February, and her sneakers were wet from the slush at the curb, and she had no bag, no phone visible, no coffee cup, nothing to suggest she was waiting for anything in particular. She was just there. Her eyes were open, but she was staring at the pavement in front of her feet. Delia watched her for a moment and said, "Bus is coming in about 8 minutes, honey. You going somewhere?" The girl looked up. Her name, Delia would learn much later, was Renee. She had dark brown eyes and a round face, and she looked at that exact moment like someone who had been asked the hardest question of their life. "I don't know," Renee said. Delia sat down on the bench beside her. The ice was cold through her coat, and she sat down anyway. She did not ask what had happened. She had a sense, the way some people do, about when asking would close a person up rather than open them. She sat there for a minute, and then she said, I work in the hospital laundry room. Every morning. Same bus. I know every face on this route. She paused. I have not seen yours before. I just moved here, Renee said. 3 days ago. By yourself? Yes. Delia looked at the wet sneakers and the thin jacket and the way the girl was holding her own arms to keep warm, and she did something she had done so many times in her life that it had ceased to feel like a choice. She reached into her bag and took out the folded $10 bill she kept in the inside pocket for emergencies, and she held it out. The bus is $1.50. The diner on Mercer is 3 blocks from the hospital stop, and they have a $2 breakfast that is better than it sounds. Renee stared at the bill for a moment. I cannot take your money, she said. You can pay it back when you are on your feet, Delia said. I ride the 712 most mornings. The bus came. Renee took the $10 and got on. Delia thought she would never see her again. That happened. You gave what you could and the person moved on, and the street absorbed them, and that was the end of it. She was all right with that. She was not keeping a ledger. Renee was on the 712 the following Monday. She had a proper coat this time, a thrifted wool one, and she had dried out her sneakers, and she had a small canvas bag over one shoulder. She dropped into the seat beside Delia and handed her a $10 bill folded the same way Delia had folded hers, and she said, "Thank you," in the particular way that meant more than the word. They rode together in the mornings for the next 6 weeks. Renee was taking the bus to a temp job at a data entry firm 4 stops south of the hospital. She had come to the city because she had gotten out of a bad situation. She did not say more than that, and Delia did not press, and she was starting over with approximately nothing, a sublet room in a shared house and a temp job, and the stubborn conviction that she was going to get herself to solid ground. She was organised about it in a way Delia found moving. She had a notebook where she tracked her expenses to the dollar. She was applying to permanent positions. She had a plan. Delia listened on the mornings when Renee talked and was quiet on the mornings when Renee needed to sit with her own thoughts. She told her once about a position she had seen posted at the hospital's administrative offices, clerical work, regular hours, good benefits. She wrote down the name of the department and the hiring coordinator and handed it to Renee on a folded piece of paper. She didn't know if anything would come of it. In April, Renee got the job. She was on the 712 the morning she found out, and she was practically vibrating with the news. And Delia held her hands for a moment and said, "I knew you would." She meant it. They still shared the bus in the mornings because the hospital stop served Renee's building now too, and they still talked, and Delia still kept crackers in her purse, and sometimes Renee brought her a coffee from the cart at Mercer, the one Delia always walked past because she could not justify the $3 on a work morning. Those coffees mattered more than Renee probably knew. By summer, Renee had moved into her own studio apartment. She showed Delia a photo on her phone, a small bright room with a window facing east and a plant on the sill that she had bought with her first full paycheck. And Delia looked at that photo the way she used to look at her boys' report cards, with a quiet pride that did not need to announce itself. The last regular morning they shared the bus was in October of that year. Renee had taken a position in the hospital's finance department, a better schedule, a different start time, a different route. She came and found Delia at the Crestfield stop on a Friday evening to say goodbye properly. She brought a card. Inside it, she had written, in careful, even handwriting, "I came to this city with nothing, and you were the first person who saw me as somebody." I will not forget that. Delia read it on the bus home. She put it in the drawer where she kept Carl's last letter and Marcus's first school picture and Kevin's old library card. The things that mattered. She did not expect to hear from Renee again. She was glad for her, genuinely and completely, and she tucked her into the part of herself where she kept the people she had wished well and let go. That is not where the story ends. Delia's cell phone rang on a Tuesday morning 18 months later, a number she did not recognize, and when she answered, a young woman's voice said, "Miss Delia, it's Renee." And there was something different in the voice, something buoyant. And before Delia could fully process the call, Renee was already talking, saying that she had been trying to find her number for 3 weeks and that she had finally gotten it from one of the regular morning drivers on Route 9, and that she was getting married in 2 months and that she wanted Delia to come. "Come to the wedding," Delia said. "Come to the wedding," Renee said. "And I need to ask you something. I want you to sit in the front pew with my family." There was a silence. "Baby," Delia said carefully, "I am not family." You were the first person who was kind to me in this city, Renee said. When I had nothing and I was scared and I was sitting on that bench in the cold and I did not know a single soul. You sat down. You stayed. She paused. My mother passed away 3 years before I moved here. My father and I do not have a relationship. I have my aunt and my 2 cousins on my mother's side, and that is my whole family. I would like you to sit with them. Delia pressed her free hand flat on her kitchen table. You do not have to do that for me, she said. I am not doing it for you, Renee said, and her voice had a steadiness to it that Delia recognized, the same steadiness she had heard on that February morning when Renee said she did not know where she was going but had not looked away. I am doing it because it is the true thing. She had told no one she was going, not Kevin, not Marcus. She had not wanted to explain it because she was not sure she could, not in a way that would not sound like she was making herself important in someone else's story. She had taken the bus, transferred at Mercer and Fifth, stood for 6 blocks and walked into the church alone, and the usher had unclipped the white ribbon and let her in. The woman beside her in the pew leaned over quietly and said, Are you a friend of Renee's? I knew her a little while, Delia said. We rode the same bus. The woman nodded slowly, and something in her expression shifted, something that looked like understanding, even though she could not possibly have understood yet. She talked about a woman on her bus, she said, from when she first came here. Delia did not answer. She looked at the altar flowers. They were white lilies and small cream roses, and they smelled like the beginning of something. The processional started. Renee came down the aisle on the arm of her cousin, a young man in his 20s who walked with the careful posture of someone doing his best to fill a role that deserved more. Renee herself was in a simple ivory gown, fitted and clean, no elaborate train, and she wore her hair natural, pinned up with small pearl pins at the crown, and she was crying before she reached the halfway point. Not from nerves, but from something else, something closer to arrival. She had the look of a woman who had carried a great weight for a long time and was finally, in this moment, setting it down. She passed the pew where Delia was sitting, and she turned her head. Their eyes met for exactly 2 seconds. Renee smiled at her. Not the polite smile you give a person you have placed in a seat. The other kind. Delia felt something unlock in her chest that she would have had difficulty naming if anyone had asked her to. The ceremony was not long. The officiant was a woman with a warm, direct manner, and the vows were the couple's own words, and Delia sat in the front pew of that church and listened to a young woman she had met on a frozen bench say, in front of everyone she loved, that she had come to this city at the lowest point of her life and had learned that you could be rebuilt by small things, by a seat offered and a voice that said, you are allowed to not be all right yet, and that she was building her life now on the belief that kindness was not a transaction, but a practice. And that you practiced it not because it came back to you, but because it was the only way to stay human. Delia kept her hands folded in her lap. She didn't cry. She almost did. She held it together with the same composure she had used to hold together 31 years of mornings that were sometimes very hard. After the ceremony, in the bright reception hall 2 blocks from the church, Renee found her. She walked up to Delia with her new husband, a quiet, broad man named Thomas, who had the easy stillness of someone who had thought carefully about who he wanted to marry, and Renee took both of Delia's hands in hers and held them the way Delia had held hers on the morning she got the hospital job. She did not say anything at first, she just held them. You look beautiful, Delia said. I had to find you, Renee said. When I was putting together the guest list, I realised I did not know your last name. I knew your first name and the bus route and the hospital and the way you kept crackers in your bag for people. That is all I knew. Marsh, Delia said. Delia. Renee repeated it like she was committing it to memory. Marsh, she held the name. There is something I want to tell you about why the front row. Thomas stepped back, gentle and considerate, giving them the space. Renee said, when I was sitting on that bench in February, I had been awake all night. I had taken the last of my money to get a bus out of a situation I needed to get out of, and I had gotten as far as Crestfield before I ran out of fare. I sat down on that bench because I didn't know what to do next. I was not thinking anything good. She paused. You understand what I mean? Delia looked at her. She understood. You sat down, Renee said. You did not ask questions, you just sat down next to me, and you said the bus was coming in 8 minutes. And something about that, about someone saying the bus is coming, like the world was still going in the right direction, and I had a reason to be on it, something about that changed it for me. I got on the bus. She pressed Delia's hands once, then released them. The front row is where the people go who made this possible, she said. You made this possible. The job, Thomas, this morning. I was going to sit down on a frozen bench and you sat down next to me. That is why you are in the front row. Delia stood very still. She thought about Carl's leaving and the years on her own, and the laundry room and the 31 years on the 712, and the way the city looked at 7 in the morning when the light came in low and gold across the avenue and the bus was full of people going to their lives. She thought about all the mornings she had noticed someone and done the small thing and never heard another word about it. She thought about the way goodness could travel in ways you could not see, could cross years and miles, and reach a white church with lilies on the altar. She thought about a $10 bill she had nearly not offered because she was never sure if these things helped or only complicated. She had been sure enough. I am glad I sat down, Delia said. It was the most she could find to say, and it was enough. At the reception, Delia was seated at a round table near the front, between Renee's aunt, a woman named Gloria, who laughed easily and made Delia feel at home inside 20 minutes, and one of the cousins who worked in insurance and wanted to know everything about the hospital laundry and ask questions like someone who genuinely wanted to know. The food was good. There was dancing that Delia did not join but watched with pleasure. Thomas and Renee danced to a song with a long instrumental opening, slowly. And Thomas kept his hand on her back in a way that made him look like a man who understood the weight she had been carrying and was glad to help carry it now. Near the end of the evening, Renee's aunt, Gloria, leaned over to Delia and said, "She described you to me about 2 months after she moved here. She called you the bus woman. She said, 'Aunt Gloria, there is a woman on my morning bus, and I think she might be an angel.'" Delia shook her head once, smiling. "I am not an angel. I just had a $10 bill and a bench to sit on." "That is all it takes sometimes," Gloria said. On the way home, on the northbound 440, the one that ran slower on Sundays, Delia sat by the window and watched the city go past. The light was failing. That particular amber hour when everything looks like it is being put to rest for the night. She had her clutch purse on her lap and her coat buttoned and her low heels still pinching just at the toe, and she was tired in the good way, the way that comes from having been present somewhere that mattered. She thought about what Renee had said, that she had been about to sit on a frozen bench and not get up. Delia had not known that. She had seen a girl who was cold and lost and she had sat down beside her, and she had not known she was doing anything more than that. She had done more than that. She just had not been there to see it. That is the thing about small kindnesses. You do not get to see most of what they do. You give the $10 and you sit down on the bench and you write down the name of the hiring coordinator, and you hand someone a coffee they would never have bought for themselves, and you do not get the full picture. The full picture is something that happens in other rooms, on other mornings, in lives you only barely touched. Most of the time you never find out. Delia found out. She looked out the window at the city, at the bus stops going by in the dusk, at the people waiting under the shelters with their bags and their phones and their quiet individual lives, and she thought, "I will sit down again tomorrow." And the day after, she had her crackers in her purse. 2 months after the wedding, a card came in the mail with no return address. Inside was a photograph, the kind that is printed at a drugstore, a little glossy with a white border. It was a picture of the front pew of the church taken from the side, and you could see the satin ribbon unclipped and hanging loose, and the small family-only placard, and the edge of Delia's belted dress and her hands folded in her lap. You could not see her face. You could see her hands, very clearly, steady and still. On the back of the photograph, in Renee's careful handwriting, it said, "For Miss Delia Marsh, who sat down." Delia put it in the drawer with the good things. It has been there ever since. She had told Kevin about it eventually, about 3 weeks after, on his first Sunday dinner. She had made chicken and rice and the cornbread he liked, and they were sitting at her kitchen table the way they always sat, him with his big hands wrapped around the mug, and her with her tea, and she had said, almost as an aside, "I went to a wedding last month." Kevin had looked up. "Whose wedding?" And she had told him. All of it, from the February morning to the bus stop, to the $10 to the morning Renee got the hospital job, to the phone call, to the white ribbon unclipped to the front pew. Kevin listened the way he listened to things that mattered, without moving. When she was done, he sat quiet for a moment and then he said, "Mama, you never told me about her." And Delia said, "There was nothing to tell yet." Kevin turned his mug in his hands. He said, "You sat down on an icy bench in 22-degree weather for a stranger." Delia said, "The bus was coming in 8 minutes." Kevin smiled at that. He shook his head. He had her eyes, Kevin did. The same quiet attentiveness. And he looked at her across the table with something that was too careful to be called pride and too specific to be called anything else. He said, "How many times have you done that? Just sat down?" Delia thought about it honestly. "I do not keep count," she said. "That is sort of the point." He nodded. They ate the chicken and the cornbread and the rice. Before he left, he stood in the doorway of the kitchen and said, "I want you to know I see it. I have always seen it. I just want to say it out loud." She told him to drive safe. She meant, "Thank you." Marcus called from Atlanta when Kevin told him. He called on a Thursday night, which was not their usual call day, and Delia was watching the news and let it go to voicemail because she did not recognize the international code. And then she saw it was Marcus and called back immediately. He answered on the first ring. He said, "Mama, Kevin told me about the wedding." His voice had a thickness to it that she recognized from when he was small, when he was trying not to show that something had hit him. She said, "It is not a big deal, Marcus." He said, "It is a big deal, Mama. That woman was on a frozen bench and you are the reason she is married and happy and alive. And I need you to hear that." Delia told him Kevin had been saying similar things and they were both being dramatic. Marcus laughed a little, then he was quiet for a moment and he said, "I think about, sometimes, when I was small, how you used to do that. Just notice people. I remember this man at the grocery once. You gave him your last $2 because he was $1 short on his bread. You did not even think about it." Delia remembered the man. She did not remember thinking about it. "I learned it somewhere," she said. There was a pause. "From you," Marcus said. "You learned it from you." After she hung up, she sat for a few minutes with the television muted and her phone in her hand, and she thought about the people her boys would be kind to in their lives, the ones they would notice, the ones they would sit beside on frozen benches, and she thought, that is how it keeps going. That is the thing that travels in rooms you cannot see. Not just one woman's life rebuilt, but the hands that watched you do it and learned the shape of the gesture and will pass it forward in their own time. The $10 did not stop at Renee. They kept going. She thought about her own mother, who was gone now 22 years. Her mother had been a quiet woman, not demonstrative, not given to speeches about virtue or what a person owed to the world. What she had given Delia was mostly the example of her own life, the way she moved through it with her attention turned outward, the way she noticed the tired and the cold and the uncertain and made small, quiet adjustments toward them without making it a production. Delia had grown up watching that and not entirely knowing she was absorbing it. Now Marcus called from Atlanta and told her that Kevin had learned it too, and she sat with that in the quiet of her apartment and let herself feel what it was worth. It was worth a great deal. It was worth maybe everything she had not been sure amounted to much on the hard evenings when the apartment was quiet and the television was on, and she wondered if she had made enough difference in the years she had been given. She had. She just had not been able to see it from where she was standing. There is a particular grief that belongs to people who do good things quietly. It is not the grief of suffering or loss exactly. It is more like the grief of invisibility. The long years of doing what you know to be right when no one is marking it down. When the people around you are getting credit for smaller things and you're passing $10 bills to strangers on freezing mornings and sitting on icy benches and writing down names on folded pieces of paper and handing someone a cup of coffee that costs $3 and you will miss for the rest of the week. Delia had lived in that invisibility for most of her adult life. She was not bitter about it, but she had felt it. On the morning after Kevin's dinner on the 7/12, she sat in her usual seat by the window and she watched the city wake up around her and she thought about the girl who had sat on the bench. She thought about the 2 seconds when their eyes had met in the middle of the aisle, Renee in her ivory gown and her pearl pins, and the particular quality of that smile, the one that was not for the front row, but for a woman on a bus and a folded $10 bill and a small offering of crackers and the name of a hiring coordinator written on a piece of paper. She thought about the photograph in the drawer, the one showing her hands steady and folded in the family-only pew. She thought about what it meant to be seen, to have someone say you mattered to what happened next, to have your name written on the back of something and placed among the good things. She thought about the people on this bus right now, the ones with the early morning faces, the ones carrying whatever they were carrying into the city. She looked at them the way she always looked, quietly, attending. A young man 3 seats up with a backpack too heavy for someone his age. A woman in scrubs who was leaning against the window with her eyes closed, not sleeping, just resting them. An older man near the back reading a folded newspaper, the old-fashioned kind, the kind she associated with men who had been reading newspapers since before phones were smart. She looked at the seat across the aisle, which was empty. At the next stop, a girl got on. She was maybe 22. She was wearing a coat that was not quite warm enough, and she had wet shoes, and she moved to the empty seat and sat down and stared at the floor. Delia watched her for a moment. Then she said, "Good morning. Where you headed?" The girl looked up. She had the same uncertainty around the eyes that Renee had had. That particular look of someone who has run out of the kind of confidence that tells you where you're going and why. "Mercer Street," the girl said. "I think there is a diner." Delia smiled. "There is," she said. "The $2 breakfast is better than it sounds." She didn't offer money this time. Sometimes the thing a person needs is not money. Sometimes it is just the fact of someone saying the city is navigable and there are diners at the end of certain routes and the bus is going where you need to go. The girl seemed to settle slightly. Her shoulders came down a quarter of an inch. The bus moved. The city came up around them in the morning light, gold and grey and waking, and Delia rode her route the way she had ridden it for 31 years, attending, noticing, present. The drawer at home held a photograph of her hands. Her sons knew what she had done. A woman named Renee was building her life on solid ground in this city, and she had been a small brick in the foundation of that. That was what there was. It was enough. It had always been enough. She had simply, on one February morning in the front pew of a church with lilies on the altar, been allowed to know it. She sat with her hands in her lap, steady as they had always been, and rode the 712 south through the waking city. At the next stop, she asked the girl her name. The girl's name was Camille. She was from Memphis originally, and she had come north 2 weeks ago following a job lead that had not materialized, the way job leads sometimes do not, and she was staying with a cousin who was getting tired of the arrangement, and she had a second interview at a logistics company on Mercer, and she was terrified. She told all of this to Delia in about 4 minutes, the compressed version that comes out when someone has been holding it and suddenly finds a place to put it. Delia listened without interrupting. When Camille finished, she looked like she had expected to feel worse for having said it out loud. "What kind of work is it?" Delia said. "The logistics company." "Dispatch coordination. I did 2 years of it in Memphis. So you know what you're doing?" "Yes," Camille said, with the slightly surprised tone of someone who has been so busy being scared that they had temporarily forgotten they were also competent. "Then that is the thing to remember," Delia said. "When you are in that room, you know what you're doing." Camille looked at her. "You sound like someone who has given that advice before." "I have ridden this bus for 31 years, Delia said. "I have given a version of that advice many times." The bus slowed for a stop. A man with a delivery cart got on and took the space near the back. The city pressed close at the windows. "My mother used to say," Camille began, and then she stopped herself. "What did she say?" Delia said. Camille smiled a little, the way people smile when they are visiting something they love, that also hurts them. "She used to say, the only person in the room who can tell you you do not belong there is you. And you should not." Delia let that settle. "Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was," Camille said. "She passed away 2 years ago." "I am sorry," Delia said, in the simple way, without elaboration. They rode in silence for a stop, not an uncomfortable silence, the kind that 2 people share when they have reached a place in a conversation that doesn't need to be filled. Then Camille said, "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "Why do you talk to people on the bus?" "Most people do not. They have their phones or their headphones or they are just looking at the floor. You just talk to me." Delia considered this. She watched the city go by at the window, the familiar storefronts, the shelter at the Mercer stop with the cracked plastic on the east side, the corner where the light ran long on weekday mornings. She had a short answer and a long answer, and neither of them was exactly right. "I suppose," she said after a moment, "because someone might need it. You never know when you sit down on a bus if the person next to you is having the hardest morning of their year. You mostly cannot tell. And if they are, and you could have said something and you did not, that seems like a waste." Camille looked at her for a moment. Then she said, quietly, "This is the hardest morning of my year." "I know," Delia said. Camille's stop was before Delia's. She stood up at Mercer and squared her shoulders and picked up her bag. She was still nervous, you could see it in the set of her jaw, but there was something different in how she was holding herself, a fraction more upright. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you." "Go show them what you know," Delia said. Camille got off the bus. Delia watched her through the window as the bus pulled away. She watched her walk up Mercer toward the logistics company, her coat not quite warm enough for the morning, her steps even and purposeful. She watched until the turn took her out of sight. She didn't know what would happen at the interview. She might get the job, or she might not. The cousin's patience might last, or it might not. The road Camille was walking was still a road with hard miles on it, and Delia knew that, and she was not naive about it. One conversation on a bus does not solve the hard things. It does not pay rent, or produce a job offer, or repair the grief of losing a mother too young. Delia knew what small things could and could not do. What they could do was this. They could change the quality of a single morning. They could say, the world is still moving in the right direction and there is a reason to be on it. They could make one person hold their shoulders a quarter of an inch higher when they walked into a room where they needed to be seen as someone who belonged there. They could do that, and that could be the thing that made the difference. Or it could not. You did not always find out. Most of the time you never knew. Some mornings you found out. Some mornings a phone rang and a voice said, "I have been trying to find you for 3 weeks," and it was a girl from a frozen bench 4 years later, calling to say that the bus had come, and she had gotten on, and she had not gotten off. Those mornings made the 31 years make sense. She settled back in her seat. The hospital stop was 4 minutes out. She had a full shift in the laundry room, 8 hours of machinery and steam and the particular tired satisfaction of work done well, and then the northbound 440 home. And she would make soup tonight, she decided, because the cold was coming back in the forecast. She had everything she needed for soup. The cracker packet in her purse was almost empty. She would need to replenish it. She made a mental note to stop at the corner store on Crestfield before she went upstairs. There was always going to be someone on the next bus who needed them. There always had been. There always would be. The city went on, and the buses ran, and the stops came and went in the morning light, and she rode her route and paid attention and did the small thing. Not because it was going to be returned to her, though sometimes it was in ways she could not have anticipated, in front pews with white ribbons and lilies on the altar. Not because someone was watching. Not because she had calculated the outcome, because it was simply who she was, and she had never found a good reason to be anyone else. She was 63 years old, and she had made 2 good men and kept a $10 bill in her inside pocket for 31 years, and sat on icy benches more times than she could count. And a young woman she had known for 6 weeks had put her in the family's front row. And she had the photograph to prove it. Her hands, steady and folded, the satin ribbon unclipped beside her. Who sat down? The bus reached the hospital stop. She stood, collected her purse, nodded at the driver the way she always did, and stepped out into the morning. The air was cold and clean. The hospital was a block east, its glass front catching the early light. She walked toward it the way she had walked toward it for 31 years, steadily, without hurry, carrying the crackers and the $10 bill and the full, unhurried attentiveness of a woman who had learned long ago that the most important things happen in the small spaces between one stop and the next.